Jesse Agler from Padres Radio, and you're listening to the Talkin' Friars podcast.
This episode of Talking Friars is brought to you by Anchor. It's the easiest way to podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app today or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to episode 22 of the Talking Friars podcast. I am your host, Ben Fadden. Today we have a very special guest. I was able to sit down with Evan Roberts. He is the afternoon drive host with Craig Carton on Carton and Roberts on WFAN in New York. An absolute huge radio host. He was nice enough to sit down to preview this Mets-Padres series with me, talk about how the Mets have been able to stay in first place and above 500 despite being out a lot of their star players, pretty much everyone except Pete Alonso and Francisco Lindor and James McCann. We talked about how he would evaluate Luis Rojas so far, and we talked about as well if he thinks that any Mets pitchers are using sticky substances after Luis Rojas denied that any pitchers were using them in the interview on Carton and Roberts yesterday. Just for a little bit of warning, there was a little bit of technical difficulties in the middle, so part of the interview, part of Evan's response was a little bit cut off, so bear with me there. But other than that, here's the interview with Evan Roberts. And here on episode 22 of the Talking Friars podcast, I'm here with WFAN's Evan Roberts. Evan, thanks for joining.
Honored to be here.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So, first off, huge fan of yours on your Saturday shows and on Carton and Roberts, and I just like to think of myself kind of as a mini you. I have season tickets for my local team, for the Padres, obviously. I keep score of every full game I watch. Sports are obviously a really huge part of my life. So my question to you is, how did your habit of keeping score and paying attention to every game come about? Was it your parents' influence, or just kind of take me through that?
So my dad has had season tickets for the Mets since the 70s. He was a diehard fan. And so when he took me as a child, at first, as a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, I didn't know what was going on. And I think when I was about 6 or 7 years old, he just showed me how to score a game and said, hey, this is a fun way to learn about the game, to kind of concentrate, to focus. And so I did it, and I really enjoyed it. And so pre-game, I'd say, hey, Dad, you buy me a scorecard? You bought me a scorecard every game. And finally, my dad was like, wait, my son loves to do this, and it's costing me a lot of money, because every time you buy a scorecard at Chase Stadium, it was, $4 or $5, $6. So he bought me a scorebook. And I forget which was my original scorebook. It may have been like one of those things they sell in Modell's or something like that, like this big, giant softball scorebook. And then I just got addicted. And as I got older and older, I wanted a better scorebook. I wanted a more professional scorebook. And so I ended up, probably around 1996, I was 13 years old, got the Bob Carpenter scorebook. And I have used that scorebook ever since. My love of scoring games hasn't wavered. Eventually, I started scoring games at home. And even now, at 37 years old, it all goes back to, as a 6-year-old, my dad teaching me how to do it, and I love it. I see no sign of me getting bored with it. Mm-hmm. So it all goes back to being a 6-year-old, and I think my dad trying to get me interested in the game, and he thought, well, let me teach him how to score a game. Maybe that'll help. It very much helped.
Right, yeah. Cool story. Moving on to the Mets, they've been out Jeff McNeil, Michael Conforto, Brandon Nimmo, Albert Almora Jr., J.D. Davis, of course, Noah Syndergaard, Carlos Carrasco, obviously, they just had injuries. They haven't even played for the Mets this year. But so how amazing is it to you that they've, been able to stay above 500 with all of that, out? They had Cameron Maybin as their 3-hitter a couple weeks, back.
It's been incredible. It really has. I mean, when they started to suffer all these injuries, the thought was just survive. Just don't fall off the mountain. Stay competitive in the NL East. And look, they've been left out by the fact the division's not very good. I mean, I'm not going to hide from that. But somehow they go on this 9-game road trip. They're taking on Arizona. They're taking on the Padres. They're taking on the Orioles. And they went 5-4. And they're winning games because their starting pitching, for the most part, has been really good, especially the top 3 guys. Their bullpen has been outstanding. And here's the thing that's such a difference from the last 2 years. Their defense is good. Their defense has been so bad for years, and it's improved in such a major way. So, look, they're not scoring a lot of runs despite pounding the Orioles the other night. They're just finding ways to win, and it's encouraging that once they start to get healthier and this lineup is more respectable, that, look, they're in a great spot. They're a couple of games up in the National League East. So it's been a lot of fun because it's been so unexpected. Obviously, the expectations were higher coming into the year, but when you lose basically your entire starting lineup, the thought is you're going to have a major fall off, and somehow they've managed to continue to stay afloat.
Right. And, Francisco Lindor obviously signing the $341 million contract. Sure, a big reason was because... Obviously, Lindor signing that big contract, and, obviously I think a big reason was because he wanted to get over Tatis's $340 million. He hasn't really lived up to that in the first 2 months of the season. 189 in March and April, hitting 204 in May, but he's kind of heated up a little bit here in June. What have you seen? What did you attribute, those early season struggles to, and what are you kind of seeing in him? Maybe it's better at bats. What are you seeing from him as of late that's kind of, he's gotten going here?
Well, there's 2 encouraging things about Lindor, despite the offense being putrid. You laid out the numbers, how bad he was in April and May. His defense hasn't wavered, right? He is still playing an elite-level shortstop. And the Mets are a better defensive team, and he has a lot to do with it. Their defensive shortstop is improved in a major way. Also, his attitude and his leadership and the fact he's always smiling has to help. I mean, the Mets seem like a team that likes each other. And even though he had a scuffle earlier in the season with Jeff McNeil, that was a game they won. That was a game where Lindor had a game-tying home run. So, a few weeks, you've seen it a little bit with his average starting to move up. But you know what? They're winning despite it. So I don't even really care about his numbers. As long as he's going to help them win baseball games, I think we'll all live with a down first year in New York, which, by the way, a lot of guys have had that first year in New York being a down year, and I think that's contributed to it too. I'm sure he's pressing, not only because he's in New York, but because, like you mentioned, he signed that mega contract. But right now, he's starting to hit, and to go along with that defense, and I think the leadership he supplied in that room, Met fans have started to lay off Francisco Lindor because he was taking a lot of heat early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And moving on to Jacob deGrom, his teammate, you can't say enough of how brilliant this guy's been. But that last start against San Diego at Petco last week, he struggled a little bit for him. Like the way that Jacob deGrom dominates, he had the bases loaded there in the 4th inning. Obviously, I don't think that you see that happening again. What have you seen from deGrom this year? And in that San Diego start, were you confident that he was going to get out of that jam?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Jacob deGrom, and this goes before he became the best pitcher in baseball. He was always incredible at getting out of jams. And I think that's a part of his success early in his career. And for Met fans, we think of Game 5 against the Dodgers in the divisional series in 15. A guy's on base every inning, a winner-take-all playoff game. And the way he steps up with guys on base is incredible. So it's become this reaction we have as Met fans that he'll load the bases with 1 out. We don't even sweat. It's like, yeah, Jake's going to find a way to get through it because that's what he does. But you hit on something. His struggles, like his mediocre starts, are not normal. Like his mediocre starts is, yeah, he put a couple of guys on base and gave up a run in 7 innings. Like he has been so incredible to watch over the last 3 years. And he's been great before that. But I think the last 3 years is where it's really taken off to the level of he's the best pitcher in baseball. But I think the best attribute of Jacob deGrom is that he can put guys on base, and he always seems to find a way to fight through it. Yeah. And I've always admired that about him the most. And it really started with that Game 5 against the Dodgers, where somehow he fought through 6 innings in a winner-take-all game on the road. And that's when I think we all knew as Met fans, this guy's got stones. And that's continued throughout his career. But it's a joy watching him every 5 days because he is doing things we've never seen before.
What do you think of his increase in velocity? Is it just him getting stronger, year by year? Or, what do you attribute that to? Because usually it's the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. He has always said it's been mechanical. And I think DeGrom is such a student of himself and a student of the game that I buy it, that his mechanics are so perfect. Mm-hmm. And you don't see him exerting any more effort. You don't see that from him. So I kind of take him by his word that he just studies himself so much and has changed some of his mechanics to where he can throw 101, 102 on a routine basis. It kind of freaks me out because you get scared about an injury. And Jake's had like a health scare just about every year, but he hasn't, to this point missed any significant time, knock on wood. So it's almost unexplainable. So I just go with what he says, which is something mechanical, and somehow, even in his 30s, he's throwing that hard. But keep this in mind about Jake. This is why I've always said 3 years ago, lock him up long term. He doesn't have a lot of innings on his arm. Mm-hmm. Remember, he came up as a shortstop. Right. He hasn't pitched nearly as much as a lot of other guys. So you can take his age and throw it out the window. He is not the equivalent of other guys who are 32 or 33 years old. So hopefully that means we've got many more years of watching Jake pitch.
Yeah, and one of those other factors that is what it's like, wow, how he continues to get better by year is that it seems like the Mets have different pitching coaches almost every year. And so that just makes it even more impressive for a guy, like you mentioned, who, he starts as a shortstop, so he probably doesn't have that much of experience, as much experience as a college pitcher had. So he might just be getting rolling here because of that, lack of experience, being younger as an every fifth day pitcher. So moving on here to Mets, they have pretty much full capacity here. I'm sure you're going to be in the building. How excited are you for Citi Field pretty much to be back to normal almost, kind of like Barclays has been?
I'm ecstatic because when I got back to Citi Field with 8,000 people there, it was exciting because you just missed being in the ballpark. And 8,000 Met fans can make a lot of noise, so I thought there was a good atmosphere. But everything changed when I walked into Barclays Center and Madison Square Garden and felt a packed arena. And it reminded me that what I have seen so far with the Mets and the Yankees, it's not normal. It's not real. So the fact that we're going to have 30-plus thousand people at Citi Field over the weekend is going to be awesome. The place is going to be loud, and it's a reminder that we're getting through this. And that's another thing, which has nothing to do with baseball, but it is the reminder. I felt that way at Barclays Center when I was finally in a packed arena. I looked around during the national anthem, and I was like, we're back. Right. And so I'm so excited to be in Citi Field when it's packed, and it's just a great sign. And hopefully, with all due respect, hopefully it's 3 W's for the Metsies.
Right, yeah. Luis Rojas and Jace Tingler, I know Craig likes to laugh at Tingler's name, but they're both in similar scenarios. Both were hired before that COVID season. They had to deal with circumstances that haven't really come up in Major League Baseball's history. Now they're both expected to lead their teams to the postseason. And they're both facing injuries. So what have you seen from Luis Rojas? Whether it's dealing with the media, dealing with you, weekly on phone calls. What have you seen from Rojas so far?
He as a manager, like we're talking the in-game decision, at times has driven me nuts, has left a lot to be desired. His handling of the media has been basically, I'm not going to give you any answers. And that's his style. And I can't criticize that because, look, Bill Belichick does that. Not every manager or coach has the same strategy. So his style in talking to us is, I'm not going to give you any information. His in-game managing has been spotty at best. With all of that said, they're winning. And it's the same thing with Jace Tingler. Like, at the end of the day, we judge these managers based on wins and losses. Whether that's fair or not, that's just a reality. So in this season's case, just forget last year. Last year was a mess, and the Mets underachieved, quite frankly. They also didn't have a lot of pitching, and it was a weird year, and I get that. And I wasn't ready to ever fire Luis Rojas off a 60-game season. I wouldn't have done that. But this season, we judge on wins and losses, and the Mets are in first place despite being ravaged by injuries. So despite what I may think about, benching or giving Pete Alonso a day off, using him as a pitcher in the sixth inning, and not keeping him in a game, or despite his decision not to bunt in a certain situation, or his bullpen usage. I can rip that all day, but if you're winning, then ultimately he's done a good job. And so far, the Mets are in first place in the National League East. So all my individual critiques, what do they mean when you have overachieved considering how many injuries you have? So with that said, I have to admit, Luis Rojas has done a good job so far.
Right. Were you surprised that, well, I guess considering the circumstances, maybe not, but were you surprised that Alderson and Cohen stuck with Rojas when they took over?
I'm not surprised for two reasons. Number one, Rojas has been in the organization for a long time. So it's not as if he was a guy that was just brought in by the past regime. So I think that the fact he was there, the fact he has a history with this organization, meant it wasn't necessarily a Brody Van Wagenen hire. He's been with the Mets for a while. And number two, it just wouldn't have been necessarily fair. And I know this isn't a fair world. You know, if you're Sandy Alderson and you see somebody who you think would be a better manager, fine, go out and hire him. But I think considering all the limitations of last year and even the limitations of this offseason, I kind of expected that they would bring him back with a short leash. You know, if the Mets underachieved this year, wouldn't have surprised me if he was fired in the middle of the season. Obviously, that's not going to happen now with the way they played. Mm-hmm. But I certainly expected that going into this season, he was going to get a crack at it. And luckily he has, because look, here are the Mets in first place, and they've been in first place for almost over a month now.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talked with Luis yesterday, and he said that he does not know of any Met that uses sticky substance. Hey, Craig.
Padre fan.
Yep. So you talked with Luis yesterday, and you said that no Met. He said no Met uses sticky stuff. To his, do you believe that? Do you believe that no one?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I think you're towing a tough line as a manager because you're managing your pitching staff, but you're also
Oh, might have lost him.
Or Francisco Lindor agrees with them. We don't know. So I think if you're Rojas, you're not going to publicly say, yes, half my staff uses it. I think, I'm just listening to what people say because we're not in locker rooms, especially now with the COVID era where no one's in a locker room. It does seem like most pitchers use something. Right. Maybe it's not to the cheating level, but they're using some kind of sticky stuff. So I think most locker rooms have it. I think what teams have to do now is they've got to be smart. They can't get caught, in the middle of a game with a bunch of crap on someone's hat. So I think Rojas and every manager's in a tough spot. They're not going to out their own players. You know what I mean? So they're going to have to be a little almost willfully ignorant. And I think that's the approach you take, where you say, not to my knowledge, which is not necessarily a lie. It's just, I don't know. Maybe they are. So it's tough. It's going to be tough for a lot of managers to answer.
Yeah. And, based on this team's, what has happened this year, obviously the injuries, have your expectations changed at all with where this team will end up, at the end of the season?
Yes. My expectation coming into the season was get me to a wild card game. Just get me there. Now, it's funny how things work. It's more realistic they win the division than they're in a wild card game because of how good the Padres are, how good the Dodgers are, the Giants, all that. But I think the division being down, and the Mets getting this opportunity to be in first place over the last month plus with all these injuries has made this they got to win the division. Like, I think I'd be massively disappointed if they don't win the NL East. There's a long way to go. I expect the Atlanta Braves to get hotter. I think they're the team that's going to be the main competition. But, yeah, look, expectations always change throughout a season. In 2015, the Mets were maybe going to be a playoff team. They win the division, and when they get to the playoffs, the expectations are, let's go win a World Series. So right now, as we sit here in June, my expectation now is to win the National League East. And anything else, anything short of that would be a disappointment.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the Braves might get hot. The Mets have the opportunity to do that once they get everyone back. So, it's still, obviously the Mets have the advantage, obviously being in first right now. As for, last question, what is your series prediction this weekend? You guys are in a good spot with DeGrom and Stroman, and Lucchesi pitched well last weekend. So what do you think of this weekend?
I'm a little negative. I think we're gonna lose 2 out of 3.
Okay.
And the reason I say that, just hear me out on that, is after a long road trip, which they just had, I've seen this so often where you come out, big crowd for the first time, and you can't hit, and you come out flat. So I can see with the DeGrom-Snell matchup losing like a 2-1 game. I have that sense. And, Stroman I have confidence in. Lucchesi I've got no confidence in. I know he wants to stick it to his former team. So I hate to be negative because I've been positive lately, and so many good things are happening in the sports world for the teams I root for. But I do expect the Padres to win 2 out of 3, if you want me to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, and, well, that's my last question. Thank you, Evan, for your time, and I'll definitely talk to you down the road.
You got it. Good luck. The rest of it will see you in October.
Yeah, definitely. And everyone, that is the episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Evan Roberts for taking his time to sit down and talk about the Mets before this Mets-Padres series gets underway at what's going to be a packed Citi Field this weekend. Really appreciate his time. As for the listeners, thank you for listening to this episode. Stay tuned to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube to get all the episodes and content, Instagram and Twitter for all the Padres content that we have every day, bullpen usage charts, game recaps, pregame thoughts from me every day. And then we'll be back after this Mets-Padres series to give our thoughts on it. Hopefully Jacob can join at that time. Thank you again for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Go Padres.